A little girl had been trapped in an abandoned building for 2 days. Her stepdad was behind this. The sky over Millbrook Falls hung low and gray that Tuesday morning, the kind of sky that couldn't decide if it wanted to rain. Big Mike Torres rolled his motorcycle up to the pump at the corner gas station, the engine rumbling low like distant thunder before he cut it off. He swung his leg over the seat, boots hitting the cracked pavement with a heavy thud. "Morning, Mike," called Ray, the gas station attendant, from behind the counter through the open door. Ray was a wiry man in his 60s, who'd worked that same counter for as long as Mike could remember. He gave Mike a small wave, the kind of wave you give someone you've seen 1,000 times and will see 1,000 more. "Morning, Ray," Mike said back, his voice deep and rough like gravel under tires. He grabbed the pump handle and stuck it into his bike's tank, settling in for the few minutes it would take to fill up. Mike Torres was a big man, the kind of big that made strangers cross to the other side of the street. 45 years old, with a scar that ran from his left eyebrow down to his jaw, a souvenir from a bar fight he barely remembered anymore. His arms were thick with muscle and covered in faded tattoos, his leather vest worn soft from years of wear. He looked like trouble. Most folks in town knew better. Most folks in town had seen him hand out ice cream cones to kids at the block party every summer, or fix a stranger's flat tire on the side of the road without asking for a dime. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. While the gas pumped, Mike's eyes wandered, the way they always did, taking in the little details of his town. That's when he saw it. Taped crooked to the inside of the gas station window, half curling at the corner like it had been put up in a hurry, was a piece of paper. Bright colors. A photo. Mike's stomach dropped before his mind even caught up with what he was seeing. He walked closer, leaving the pump still clicking away behind him. The paper read, "Missing" in big, bold letters at the top. And under those letters was a photo Mike recognized instantly. A gap-toothed smile. 2 little pigtails, one slightly higher than the other, like she'd done them herself. Lily Anderson. Mike had watched that little girl grow up over the past year, pedaling her pink bicycle with the white basket past the clubhouse almost every single day. She'd wave at him and the boys like they were the most normal neighbors in the world, not a pack of bikers with scars and leather jackets. Sometimes she'd stop and ask Preacher about his tattoos. Once, she told Tiny that his beard looked like a scary Santa Claus, and Tiny had laughed so hard he nearly fell off his stool. Mike reached out and peeled the poster gently from the glass, careful not to tear it, like it was something fragile and precious. "That's a real shame," Ray said, stepping out from behind the counter, wiping his hands on a rag. "Little Anderson girl. Been gone since yesterday morning, they're saying." Mike's jaw tightened. "Yesterday morning?" Ray nodded, his face somber. "Her stepdad's been on the news, crying and everything, begging for her to come home. Cops think she probably wandered off, or maybe got picked up by somebody passing through town. You know how it is." Mike stared down at the poster in his hands. Lily's smile stared back up at him, frozen in time, unaware of anything that had happened since that photo was taken. His chest felt tight, like something heavy had settled there, and refused to move. He thought about her riding past the clubhouse, waving with her whole arm like she was trying to make sure they saw her. He thought about the way she always rang her little bicycle bell twice, like a secret code between them. Mike stood frozen in the gas station parking lot, the poster gripped tight in his rough hands, his mind racing through everything Ray had just told him. His jaw set hard, worry carving deep lines into his scarred face. Without another word, he folded the poster carefully and tucked it inside his vest. He climbed back onto his motorcycle, started the engine, and pointed it toward the clubhouse instead of the road he'd planned to take that morning. The clubhouse sat at the edge of town, a squat brick building with a gravel lot, and a faded sign that just said "Territory" over the door. Mike's bike crunched up the gravel, and he cut the engine, the sudden quiet ringing in his ears. Inside, the smell of strong coffee and motor oil hung in the air, familiar as an old friend. Preacher sat at the long wooden table by the window, his reading glasses perched on his nose, flipping through a parts catalog. Tiny was hunched over near the coffee pot, pouring himself a mug so big it looked more like a bowl, his massive shoulders straining the seams of his cut. Rico leaned back in a folding chair, boots up on a crate, scrolling through something on his phone. "Well, look what the wind blew in," Tiny said, grinning as Mike pushed through the door. "Thought you were headed out to the Miller job this morning." Mike didn't answer right away. He walked straight to the table and pulled the folded poster from inside his vest, smoothing it out flat on the wood between the coffee mugs and the ashtray. Preacher looked up over his glasses. Rico set his phone down. Tiny stopped mid-pour. "Lily Anderson," Mike said. His voice was low, rough at the edges. "Ray at the gas station told me she's been missing since yesterday morning." The room went quiet. Preacher reached out and turned the poster toward himself, studying the photo like he might find an answer hidden in that gap-toothed smile. "That's the little one who rides her bike past here," Preacher said slowly. "Pigtails, rings her bell twice." "That's her," Mike said. Tiny set his mug down hard enough that coffee sloshed over the rim. "The Santa Beard kid?" His voice, usually booming with laughter, had dropped into something quieter, something Mike had rarely heard from him. "She told you that your beard looked scary," Mike said. "You laughed for 10 minutes. Tiny didn't laugh now. He just stared at the poster, his big hands curling into fists at his sides. Rico leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Cops got anything? Leads? Sightings? Anything?" Mike shook his head. "Ray said they're calling it a runaway. Maybe somebody passing through picked her up. Nobody's out looking hard, not from what I can tell." "She's 6, Preacher said flatly, like the word itself was an argument. "I know how old she is," Mike said. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, heavy, the kind of silence that comes when men who look tough on the outside feel something crack open on the inside. Mike pulled out a chair and sat down across from Preacher, his eyes still fixed on the poster. "Something's not sitting right with me," Mike said. "A kid like that, she doesn't just wander off. She's not the type. And a town this small, somebody would have seen something by now." "Cops think different?" Rico asked. "Cops think what's easy to think," Mike said. And there was an edge in his voice now, something old and tired. "I've seen it before. Man's on the news practically begging for cameras, and everybody just nods along like that's how a father's supposed to look." Tiny frowned. "Stepdad's on the news?" "Ray said so. Said he's been crying, pleading the whole show." Mike glanced at the small television mounted in the corner of the clubhouse, its screen dark and dusty from disuse. "Noon News ought to have it. Let's see for ourselves." Rico grabbed the remote off the crate and clicked the television on. It buzzed to life, the picture flickering before settling into focus. The four of them sat in silence, coffee going cold in their hands, waiting. The local news logo spun onto the screen, followed by a reporter standing outside a modest house Mike didn't recognize, her microphone held up toward a man standing on the porch steps. Derek Anderson. Early 30s, sandy hair, a face that might have been handsome if it weren't twisted up in what was supposed to be grief. "Please," Derek said into the camera, his voice cracking right on cue. "Please, if anybody knows anything, bring my baby girl home. She's all we have. She's everything." Mike leaned forward slowly, elbows on his knees, eyes narrowed as he studied the man's face, the way his hands trembled just enough to be noticed, the way his eyes darted toward the camera lens for half a second too long. Something about that, Mike muttered, low enough that only the other three could hear him. Feels rehearsed. Wrong. The Millbrook Falls police station was a squat, tired-looking building made of the same brick as half the town, with a flagpole out front that needed a new rope. Mike parked his bike near the curb and sat there a moment, letting the engine tick as it cooled, gathering the words he wanted to say before he went in and said them wrong. Inside, the station smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. A ceiling fan turned lazy circles overhead, doing little against the afternoon heat. The woman at the front desk looked up, recognized him, and waved him back without much fuss. Mike had done enough favors around town, fixed enough cars for free, that most folks in Millbrook Falls knew him by name and didn't flinch at his leather vest or the scar that ran along his jaw. Officer Daniels was at his desk near the back, a stack of files in front of him, his tie loosened like he'd been there since dawn. He looked up when Mike's shadow fell across the doorway, and something in his face went carefully neutral, the way it did whenever Mike showed up asking questions. "Mike," Daniels leaned back in his chair. "Didn't expect you." "Figured you wouldn't." Mike took the seat across from the desk without waiting to be asked. "Got a few minutes?" "For you? Always." Daniels closed the file in front of him. "This about the Anderson girl?" "You know it is." Daniels sighed, rubbing a hand across his tired eyes. "Mike, I know how it looks. I know the whole town's worked up. But we're doing everything by the book here." "By the book got her found yet?" The words came out sharper than Mike meant, and he saw Daniels's jaw tighten just slightly. But Daniels didn't snap back. He never did. That was the thing about Daniels. He was a decent man, just a man who trusted procedure more than instinct. "We've got officers canvassing," Daniels said. "We've put the word out to neighboring counties. We're following every lead that comes in." "And the stepdad?" Daniels' eyes flicked up, sharper now. "What about him?" "You watched that interview this morning? Something about it didn't sit right with me." "Mike!" Daniels' voice had a warning edge to it now, gentle but firm. "I understand you've got a good gut. I've seen it work before. But you gotta understand we looked at Derek Anderson first thing. Standard procedure, always look at family first. He's got no record, no history of violence, passed a preliminary interview clean. His alibi checks out for the time she went missing." "Alibi checks out how? He was home, wasn't he? Alone with her?" "He was at work," Daniels said. "We confirmed it with his manager. Time clock, security footage, the whole thing. He wasn't anywhere near that house when she disappeared." Mike sat with that a moment, feeling the ground shift a little beneath his suspicion, but not enough to knock it over. "Then who?" Daniels leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "We've had reports of a transient passing through town that week. Fella matching a description was seen near the elementary school, near the park. We think it's possible Lily wandered off, maybe got approached, maybe went along with somebody she thought was being kind. Kids that age, they don't always understand stranger danger the way we wish they did." "That's your theory? A stranger just happened to be passing through the same week?" "It happens more than you'd think," Daniels said, not unkindly. "I know it's not the answer anybody wants, but right now that's where the evidence points." Mike shook his head slowly, feeling something cold settle in his chest. "I've known Derek Anderson maybe twice, at the bar, nothing more. But something about that man doesn't sit right with me. Never has." "I hear you," Daniels said, and he did sound like he meant it. "But Mike, I need you to let us handle this. I know you and your boys mean well. I know you care about this town. But this is police work. Let the professionals do their job." Mike stood up slower than he wanted to, his knees protesting after too many years on the road. "Professionals had 2 days," he said quietly. "Little girl's still out there." Daniels didn't have an answer for that. Mike gave him a short nod and walked out, the station door swinging shut behind him with a heavy, final sound. Outside, the sun was dropping low over the rooftops, and Mike stood by his bike a long moment before swinging his leg over the seat, already thinking about the warehouse, about drunken bar talk, about the way Derek's eyes had flicked to that camera lens. The clubhouse garage sat behind the old auto shop on 5th Street, a cinder-block building that smelled like motor oil and cigarette smoke, the kind of smell that had soaked so deep into the walls it would probably outlast the building itself. Mike pushed through the side door with a roll of paper under his arm, an old road map he'd pulled from the bottom drawer of his desk, the kind of paper map nobody used anymore now that everybody had a phone. Preacher was already there, sitting on an overturned bucket near the workbench, cleaning his hands with a rag, even though his hands didn't look dirty. He was a lean man, all sharp angles and quiet eyes, the kind of man who said 10 words a day and made every one of them count. He looked up when Mike came in and didn't say anything, just nodded once, like he already knew why he'd been called. Tiny was harder to miss. He filled the doorway to the back room, ducking his head out of habit, even though the ceiling was plenty tall enough. He had a bag of chips in one hand, and a look of concern on his broad face that didn't match the joking way he usually carried himself. "Boss," Tiny said. "Heard about the girl. Whole town's talking. That's why I called you." Mike set the roll of paper down on the workbench, pushing aside a pile of old spark plugs to make room. "Where's Rico?" "Here." Rico came in from outside, wiping his hands on his jeans, his dark eyes sharp and alert the way they always were. Rico noticed things other people missed, little details, the kind of thing that made him useful for exactly this sort of work. "What have you got?" Mike unrolled the map and set a wrench on one corner and an ashtray on the other to keep it flat. The map showed all of Millbrook Falls, the streets curling out from downtown like veins, the school and the church, and the park all marked in small print. "Police are calling it a runaway," Mike said. "Think some drifter maybe grabbed her. Maybe she wandered off with a stranger. Daniel showed me Derek's alibi, and it checks out. He was at work when she went missing." "So it ain't him," Tiny said, around a mouthful of chips. "I didn't say that." Mike pulled a marker from his jacket pocket and uncapped it with his teeth. "I said his alibi for that hour checks out. Don't mean he's clean. Man's got no reason to plan something himself if he can get somebody else to do it, or if he set something up before he ever left for his shift that morning." Preacher leaned forward, studying the map. "You think this goes deeper than the cops are looking?" "I know these streets," Mike said. "Been riding them 30 years. Cops are checking the school, the park, the places a kid might wander. But there's places in this town nobody thinks about anymore. Old buildings, empty lots, places that used to be something and now they're just sitting there rotting." He started marking the map, small X's near the edges of town, the old grain elevator that hadn't been used since the 80s, the empty lot behind the shuttered bowling alley, a string of boarded-up houses on Larch Street that the bank had been trying to sell for years. Rico moved in closer, tracing a finger along the edge of the map. "That's a lot of ground to cover." "That's why I called you 3, Mike said. "We split up, cover more ground than the cops bothered to look at." Tiny set his chip bag down, wiping his hand on his jeans before pointing at a stretch of land on the far edge of town, past the train tracks. "What about out there? Ain't much out that way except that old warehouse." Mike's marker stopped moving. Something in his chest went still and quiet, the way it did sometimes right before a piece clicked into place. He stared at the spot Tiny was pointing to, a wide patch of empty land near the edge of the map, slated for a highway extension that never got built. "Derek's uncle's warehouse," Mike said slowly. Preacher looked up. "What's that?" Mike set the marker down on the workbench, remembering now the memory rising up clear as anything. Months back, at the bar on Route 9, Derek 3 beers in and running his mouth the way drunk men do, bragging about how his uncle had died and left him that old warehouse out on the edge of town, slated for demolition, worth nothing but the land it sat on. Mike hadn't thought much of it at the time. Just bar talk. Just a man puffing himself up trying to sound like he had something going for him. He talked about it once, Mike said. Months ago. Said it was his now, said it was getting torn down eventually, but nobody was doing anything with it in the meantime. Rico's eyes narrowed. Empty building. Nobody watching it. Easy place to hide something you don't want found. The garage went quiet a moment, the four of them looking at that empty patch on the map, the weight of what it might mean settling over the room. That's our first stop, Mike said. Morning. Before the sun's even up good. Preacher nodded once. Tiny set his jaw, all the joking gone out of his face now. Rico was already reaching for his jacket, already thinking ahead to what they'd need. Get some rest, Mike said, rolling the map back up carefully, tucking it under his arm. Long day tomorrow. The morning came up gray and cold, the kind of gray that made a man's bones ache before he even swung a leg over his bike. Mike was up before the sun, standing in his kitchen drinking coffee that tasted like burnt rubber, staring at the map spread out on his table. He'd barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lily's gap-toothed smile from that missing poster, taped crooked to the gas station window, curling a little at the corner where the tape had started to give. By 6, the four of them were gathered at the garage, the bikes lined up outside like a row of sleeping animals. Nobody said much. Preacher checked his mirrors twice, though there wasn't a thing wrong with them. Tiny zipped his jacket up to his chin against the morning chill. Rico had a flashlight, a crowbar, and a bottle of water stuffed into his saddlebag, thinking ahead the way he always did. We start small, Mike said, straddling his bike. Work our way out to the warehouse. If she's close, we don't want to walk past her looking for something bigger. They rode out past the edge of downtown, past the gas station with the poster still taped to the glass, past the school with its empty playground, swings hanging still in the cold air. The engines rumbled low, filling the quiet morning with sound, and Mike felt that old, familiar comfort of the road under him, even with his stomach twisted up in knots. The first stop was the shuttered bowling alley, its sign missing half its letters, spelling out nothing but a sad little riddle against the sky. They split up, each man taking a different side of the building, calling Lily's name into broken windows, shining flashlights into corners thick with dust and pigeon droppings. Nothing. Just old lanes warped from water damage, a few forgotten bowling pins scattered like bones. Next came the boarded-up houses on Larch Street, one after another, a whole row of them, paint peeling, porches sagging. Mike kicked open a door that had already been kicked open by somebody else years back, and found nothing but a nest of raccoons that scattered screeching into the walls. Tiny came out of the house next door sneezing from the dust, shaking his head at Mike from across the overgrown yard. By midday, they'd covered the grain elevator, its metal sides rusted through, ladders missing rungs, the inside smelling like old grain gone to rot. Preacher climbed halfway up before deciding it wasn't safe, before deciding no 6-year-old girl could have gotten up there on her own anyway. Rico checked the empty lot behind it, kicking through weeds grown up through cracked concrete, finding nothing but a rusted shopping cart and a few beer cans. The afternoon sun came out weak and pale, doing little to warm the cold that had settled into all of them, a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. They ate lunch, sitting on their bikes outside a gas station, sandwiches Tiny had grabbed that morning, nobody saying much, all of them chewing slow, thinking hard. Nothing, Tiny said finally, wiping crumbs off his beard. Whole morning and nothing? There's still ground to cover, Mike said, though even he could hear the tiredness creeping into his own voice. They kept at it through the afternoon, checking a burned-out church on the edge of town, its steeple leaning sideways like it might topple any minute. They checked an old motel, rooms empty except for broken furniture and graffiti on the walls. They checked a self-storage place gone bankrupt, half the units standing open, empty, forgotten. By the time the sun started dipping low, painting the sky orange and purple over the train tracks, they were all exhausted, filthy, discouraged. Mike's hands were black with dust and rust, his shoulders aching from crawling through tight spaces meant for men half his size. Preacher had a cut on his forearm from a nail he hadn't seen. Tiny's boots were caked in mud from the ditch behind the old church. They gathered near the tracks as the light faded, the four of them standing in a loose circle, bikes ticking as the engines cooled. "That's everything but the warehouse," Rico said, voice flat with exhaustion. Mike looked out toward the horizon, to where the old warehouse sat waiting, its shape barely visible now against the darkening sky, big and silent and locked up tight. "Tomorrow," Mike said. "First thing. We hit the warehouse." Nobody argued. They climbed back on their bikes, engines rumbling to life one after another, and rode back toward town as the last light disappeared behind them. The next evening, Mike told the others he wanted to check the warehouse alone first. "Quiet like," he said, standing by his bike outside the garage. "No sense bringing everybody out there if it's nothing. Last thing we need is 4 bikes rattling around and scaring off whoever might be watching that place." Preacher didn't like it. He crossed his big arms and shook his head slow. "You shouldn't go alone, Mike, not out there." "I'll call if I find anything," Mike said. "Just need eyes on it first. Trust me on this one." Tiny and Rico exchanged a look, but nobody argued further. That was the thing about riding with Mike all these years. When his voice went quiet and flat like that, there wasn't any point pushing back. He'd made up his mind. He rode out alone as the sun started sinking, the sky turning that deep orange color that always came right before the dark swallowed everything whole. The road out to the warehouse district was empty, cracked pavement lined with weeds pushing up through the gaps, telephone poles leaning like tired old men. The farther he rode, the quieter it got, until it was just the sound of his engine and the wind whipping past his ears. The warehouse came into view slow, rising up out of the flat land like something that didn't belong there anymore. It was a big, ugly thing. Brick walls gone gray and streaked with water stains, windows either boarded up or busted out, glass teeth still hanging in some of the frames. A chain-link fence sagged around the property, rusted through in spots, easy enough to duck through if a person wanted. Mike killed the engine a block away and walked the rest of the way in, boots crunching over gravel and broken glass. The evening light was fading fast now, turning everything the color of an old bruise. He pulled a flashlight from his jacket but didn't turn it on yet, not wanting to announce himself before he had to. He started walking the perimeter, slow and careful, the way Rico had taught him years back. Check every angle. Don't rush. His heart was already pounding, though he told himself it was nothing, just another dead end like all the others. The building loomed over him, silent, still. Somewhere far off, a dog barked twice and went quiet. Mike kept walking, running his hand along the brick as he went, feeling for anything loose, anything that looked disturbed. He rounded the back corner of the building, where the loading dock sat empty and rotting, wooden boards gone soft with years of rain. That's when he heard it. A sound so faint he almost missed it. so faint he stopped dead in his tracks, holding his breath, straining his ears against the quiet evening air. There it was again. A cry. Weak, thin, barely more than a whisper of sound, coming from somewhere behind the wall to his left. Mike's whole body went cold and then hot all at once, adrenaline flooding through him like something set on fire. He pressed his ear against the boards, heart slamming so hard he could feel it in his throat. "Lily," he said, voice cracking. "Lily, baby, is that you?" The cry came again, a little louder this time, shaky and small, like a kitten mewing somewhere it shouldn't be. That was all Mike needed. He didn't think, didn't plan, didn't wait for backup or call anybody. He just moved. He slammed his boot into the rotting boards. Once, twice, the wood splintering and giving way easy, soft with years of water damage. He tore at the pieces with his bare hands, splinters digging into his palms, not caring, not feeling it. Behind the boards was a false wall, drywall thin and cheap, and he punched straight through it, clawing an opening wide enough to see through. And there, in the dim light bleeding through the hole, curled up small and still against the corner, was Lily. Her hair was matted, her face streaked with dirt and dried tears, her lips cracked and pale. She was shivering, her small body trembling and the cold, dehydrated eyes barely able to open all the way. Above her, a broken pipe dripped slow and steady, the only thing that had kept her alive these 2 long days. "I've got you," Mike said, voice breaking as he reached through the gap and pulled her gently into his arms. "I've got you now, baby girl. I've got you." Mike shrugged out of his leather jacket in one quick motion, wrapping it around Lily's small, shaking body. The jacket swallowed her whole, worn leather still warm from his body heat, smelling like engine oil and road dust. She didn't fight him. She just pressed her face into his chest and let out a sound that wasn't quite crying, more like something broken finally being allowed to break. "Easy now," Mike whispered, cradling her head against his shoulder. "You're safe. You hear me? You're safe now." He fumbled for his phone with one hand, keeping her tucked tight against him with the other arm. His fingers were shaking so bad he almost dropped it twice before he got the numbers punched in. "I need an ambulance," he said, voice raw. "Warehouse District, Old Kessler building off Route 9. I found her. I found the missing girl, Lily Anderson. She's alive, she's breathing, but she needs help fast." The dispatcher asked questions, but Mike barely heard them, answering on instinct while his eyes stayed locked on Lily's face. Her eyes fluttered open for just a second, unfocused, glassy, and then closed again. He sat down right there on the broken loading dock, cradling her like she weighed nothing at all, rocking her slow the way he imagined a grandfather might, though he'd never had the chance to be one. "Stay with me, baby girl," he murmured. "Stay right here with me." The sirens came fast, red and blue lights washing over the cracked pavement and rusted fence, turning the whole abandoned lot into something almost beautiful in its chaos. Paramedics swarmed out of the ambulance, and Mike forced himself to let go, though every part of him screamed not to. He watched them lay her on the stretcher, watched them wrap her in warm blankets and hook up an IV, watched her tiny hand reach out weakly for something, for anything, before a paramedic gently placed it back down at her side. Word spread through Millbrook Falls faster than the ambulance could make it to the hospital. Phones buzzed, porch lights flicked on. Neighbors stepped outside in their pajamas, whispering to each other across fences. By the time Mike climbed into his truck to follow behind the ambulance, the local news van was already parked outside the gas station, a reporter breathlessly announcing that missing 6-year-old Lily Anderson had been found alive, and that new questions were surfacing about her stepfather's involvement. The story that had gripped the town for 2 days now had a name attached to the shadows. Derek's tearful pleas on camera didn't look the same anymore. People who'd nodded along with his grief just yesterday were now shaking their heads, saying they always thought something seemed off about him. At the hospital, Mike paced the hallway outside the room where doctors worked on Lily, his hands still raw and bleeding from tearing through the boards. A nurse offered to clean the cuts, but he waved her off, too focused on the door, waiting for any word. Finally, they let him in for just a moment, just long enough to give Lily comfort while they finished running tests. She was hooked up to machines now, an IV drip in her thin little arm, oxygen tube resting under her nose. Her eyes opened when he stepped close, and this time they found him, really found him, recognition flickering through the exhaustion. "Mike," she whispered, her voice cracked and dry as paper. "I'm right here," he said, taking her small hand in his big, scarred one. "Right here, sweetheart." Her fingers curled weakly around his, gripping tight like she was afraid he might disappear if she let go. Her lips moved, and Mike leaned in close to hear her. "Daddy said Mommy would finally love him again," she whispered. Mike went very still. The words hit him like a fist to the chest, slow and cold, sinking in deep. He opened his mouth to ask her what she meant, but her eyes had already fluttered shut, exhaustion pulling her back under. He straightened up slowly, his mind racing, and that's when he heard it. Just outside the door, 2 police officers were talking low, voices meant to stay private. Mother was seen out there too, helping him search those exact areas. Maybe she knew more than she's letting on. Mike stood frozen in the doorway, Lily's words still echoing in his ears, the officers' whispers landing like a second blow. The morning sun came in weak through the hospital blinds, cutting thin stripes of light across the floor. Mike stood outside room 214, holding a paper cup of coffee he didn't really want, just something to keep his hands busy. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lily's face in that broken wall, heard her whisper about her daddy, and her mommy loving him again. He pushed the door open slow, careful not to make noise. Sarah Anderson sat in the chair beside the bed, bent forward with her forehead resting near Lily's hand, like she'd fallen asleep, praying. Her hair was a mess, pulled back in a rubber band that had given up holding much of anything. She wore the same clothes from the news broadcast 2 nights ago, wrinkled now, stained with something that might have been coffee, or might have been tears. She looked up when the door creaked, and her whole face changed. Relief. Pure, raw relief, the kind that comes only after real fear. "Mike," she said, standing so fast her chair scraped the floor. "Mike, I don't even know what to say to you." "You don't have to say anything," he said, standing awkward in the doorway with his coffee. But she crossed the room anyway and threw her arms around him, sudden and fierce, her whole body shaking. He stood stiff for a second, unsure what to do with his hands, then set the coffee down on a table and hugged her back. Gentle, like he might break her if he wasn't careful. "You found her," Sarah said into his shoulder, her voice cracking apart. "Everybody else gave up. The police, they said she probably ran off with somebody. They said things about her that made me want to scream. But you didn't stop looking. You didn't stop." "I couldn't," Mike said simply. "Not when it was her." Sarah pulled back, wiping her face with the back of her hand, laughing a little through the tears. The kind of laugh that comes out when a person doesn't know what else to do with all that feeling. "She talks about you all the time, you know. Mike from the motorcycle place. She thinks you're some kind of superhero." Mike felt something twist in his chest, hearing that, thinking about what the police had been whispering in the hallway last night. He looked past Sarah to the bed, where Lily lay sleeping. Tubes still in her arm, but her color better than it had been, some pink back in her cheeks. "How's she doing?" he asked. "Better." Sarah sat back down, taking Lily's small hand in both of hers, careful of the IV. "Doctors say she's dehydrated bad, and she's got some cuts and bruises, but nothing broken. Nothing that won't heal." Her voice dropped lower. "Not on the outside anyway." Mike watched her thumb trace slow circles on Lily's palm, the same way a mother does without even thinking about it. Some instinct built into her bones. Sarah leaned down and pressed a kiss to Lily's forehead, whispering something too soft for him to hear. Words meant only for her daughter. He thought about the officers' voices in the hallway. Mother was seen out there too, helping him search those exact areas. Maybe she knew more than she's letting on. He looked at Sarah now, really looked at her. The dark circles under her eyes. The way her hands trembled slightly even now, exhaustion and relief tangled together. The way she hadn't left this chair, hadn't slept in a real bed, hadn't eaten more than a vending machine sandwich probably, all because she couldn't bear to be anywhere but next to her daughter. This didn't look like guilt. This looked like a mother who'd been living inside a nightmare for 2 days straight. But something about it didn't add up. If she really had no idea what Derek was planning, why would she be out searching the exact spots where he told her to look? Coincidence, maybe. Or maybe she was smarter than anyone realized, playing her part just as good as her husband played his on that news camera. Mike didn't know, and that bothered him more than anything. Lily stirred in her sleep, murmuring something, and Sarah leaned close immediately, brushing hair back from her daughter's forehead, whispering comfort even though the girl wasn't fully awake. It was such a small thing, such an ordinary thing, a mother comforting her child. But Mike had seen enough fake tears on that news broadcast to know the difference between performance and truth. He decided right then he wasn't going anywhere, not until he understood exactly what happened in that warehouse and exactly how much Sarah Anderson really knew. That same afternoon, Mike sat in the small waiting area down the hall, still in the same clothes from the night before, drinking coffee he didn't want for the 3rd time that day. Through the window he could see the parking lot, cars glinting under the sun, and beyond that the road leading back toward town. He kept thinking about Sarah's face when she hugged him. He kept thinking about the way she loved that little girl. And he kept thinking about what the officers had whispered in the hallway. He didn't hear the commotion at first. It started as footsteps, quick and hard against the tile, then voices, low and serious. He looked up and saw 2 police officers moving down the hallway toward room 214. Officer Daniels among them, his face set in a way Mike hadn't seen before. Not the tired, dismissive look from 2 nights ago. Something sharper, something certain. Mike stood up, coffee forgotten on the plastic chair beside him. "Daniels," he said, "what's going on?" Daniels stopped, glancing at Mike like he was deciding how much to say. "We got a warrant," he said finally, "for Derek Anderson. His story fell apart during questioning last night. Times don't match up. Neighbor saw his truck near that warehouse 2 days before Lily disappeared, when he claimed he hadn't been out that way in months. We got enough now?" Mike felt something cold settle in his stomach, even though part of him had known. Known since he watched those fake tears on the news. Known since Lily whispered those words about her daddy and her mommy loving him again. "You arresting him now?" Mike asked. "Here." "He's down in the cafeteria," Daniels said. "Sarah asked him to bring her something to eat. We're picking him up there. Didn't want to do it in front of the little girl." Mike nodded slow, and the officers moved on, down toward the elevator, their radios crackling low with words Mike couldn't quite make out. He stood there a moment in the empty hallway, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on him. Derek Anderson, sobbing on camera, pleading for his baby girl. All of it fake, all of it a performance to win back a wife who was already halfway out the door. He thought about Sarah in that room, sitting beside her daughter's bed, believing her husband was somewhere out there right now, worried sick just like her. She had no idea what was about to happen. Mike walked back toward room 214, slow, unsure what he was even going to do when he got there. He didn't have to decide. The door opened before he reached it, and Sarah stepped out into the hallway, her phone in her hand, face pale. "Mike," she said, "somebody just texted me, some reporter I talked to yesterday. She said Derek's being arrested, right now, downstairs." Her voice shook, confusion twisting her features. "That doesn't make sense. Why would they arrest him? He's been out there searching just as hard as anybody. He's been calling the police every hour. She stopped. Mike watched something shift behind her eyes, some piece falling into place that she didn't want to look at directly. "Mike," she said again, quieter now. "What's happening?" He didn't say anything right away. He didn't know how to say it in a way that wouldn't break her apart right there in the hallway. But she was already reading it on his face, the truth spreading over her like cold water. "He staged it," Mike said finally, gentle as he could make the words. "Sarah, they think Derek staged the whole thing, made it look like a kidnapping, planned on being the one to rescue her himself." For a moment, Sarah just stood there, blinking, like the words hadn't fully landed yet. Then her legs gave out from under her, and she went down hard against the hallway wall, sliding to the floor, her phone clattering away from her hand. A sound came out of her that wasn't quite a scream, and wasn't quite a sob, something raw and broken, the sound of a person's whole world cracking apart at once. Mike was on his knees beside her before he even thought about it, one big hand on her shoulder, steady, not letting go. "I'm here," he said. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm right here." The days after Derek's arrest moved slow for Sarah, like wading through deep water. Lily was home now, tucked into her own bed with her own blankets, but she still woke up crying most nights, calling out for her mother even when Sarah was sitting right there beside her. The doctors said it would take time. Everyone kept saying that word. Time. Like it was something Sarah had plenty of. What she didn't have plenty of was patience from the town. It started small. Mrs. Hutchins from the flower shop, a woman Sarah had known for 10 years, stopped waving when Sarah drove past. Then it was the checkout line at the grocery store, where the cashier who used to chat about the weather now rang up Sarah's items in silence, eyes down, mouth tight. Sarah told herself she was imagining it. She told herself people were just busy, just tired, just distracted by their own lives. But then came the day she ran into Carol Jennings outside the pharmacy. Carol had been Sarah's friend since high school. They used to trade recipes and complain about their husbands over coffee. Now Carol looked at her like she was looking at a stranger. "I heard you helped him search," Carol said, her voice careful, testing. "The warehouse. You were out there with him." "I didn't know, Carol. I swear to you, I didn't know anything." Carol's smile was thin and didn't reach her eyes. "Sure," she said. "Sure, of course." And then she was gone, walking fast toward her car like she couldn't get away quick enough. By the end of the week, the whispers had grown teeth. Sarah heard them everywhere, even when people thought she couldn't. At the school pickup line, at church, where she used to feel so at home, and now felt like every eye in the room was a spotlight burning into her back. People said things like, "A mother should have known." They said, "How do you not notice your own husband planning something like that?" They said, "Maybe she wanted the attention too." None of it was true. But truth didn't seem to matter much once a story like that got moving. Mike heard it too, though he tried to shield Sarah from most of it. He was sitting at the counter of the Millbrook Diner one afternoon, drinking coffee he actually wanted this time, when he heard two women in the booth behind him talking in low voices that weren't quite low enough. "I just don't buy it," one of them said. "You live with a man, you're married to him, and you don't notice he's planning something like that? Come on. She had to know something." "That's what I said," the other one answered. "And now she's got all that money coming in, the donations and everything. Must be nice." Mike set his coffee cup down harder than he meant to. The sound cracked through the diner, and a few heads turned. He didn't care. He turned around on his stool, slow, deliberate, and looked at the two women. He recognized them both, Barbara Kessler and her sister, regulars at the diner, the kind of women who knew everybody's business and made sure everybody knew they knew it. "You two want to say that a little louder," Mike said, "so everybody can hear it clear?" Barbara's face went pink. "Mike, we were just talking. I heard what you were talking about." His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it now, something the whole diner could feel. Sarah Anderson spent 2 days out of her mind with worry, same as any of us would be. She helped search because her husband told her where to look, and she trusted him, same as any wife would trust her husband. That's not a crime. That's not something to whisper about over pie. The diner had gone quiet. Even the cook had stopped scraping the grill, watching from the pass-through window. "That little girl is home now because good people didn't stop looking," Mike went on. "And her mother is doing everything she can to help her heal. Maybe instead of picking her apart, this town ought to give her a chance. She didn't do anything wrong. She's a victim in all this too, same as Lily." Nobody said anything. Barbara looked down at her coffee, her sister staring at the table like it had suddenly become very interesting. Mike turned back around, picked up his cup, and took a sip like nothing had happened. But inside, he was surprised at himself. Surprised at how fast the words had come, how certain he'd felt saying them. He hadn't planned on defending anybody. He'd just heard those women talking about a woman he'd come to care about, a family that wasn't his own blood, and something in him hadn't been able to sit still and let it happen. Mike parked his motorcycle at the curb outside Sarah's small house, the one with the faded blue shutters and the porch swing that hadn't moved in years. He killed the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the quiet street. It was strange how normal everything looked. Kids' bikes lying in yards, a sprinkler ticking back and forth on someone's lawn, like nothing terrible had happened here just a week ago. He climbed the porch steps, slow, his boots heavy on the wood, and knocked twice. Sarah answered with dark circles under her eyes, and a dish towel still in her hand. She looked thinner than he remembered from before all this started. Her eyes lit up a little when she saw him, though the way they always did now, like he was a proof that not everyone in this town had turned against her. "Mike," she said, stepping back to let him in. "I wasn't expecting you." "Just checking in," he said. "How's Lily doing?" "She's napping." Sarah led him into the small kitchen, where the coffee pot sat half full, and a stack of mail sat unopened on the table. Bills, probably. Or worse, letters from people who had opinions about her. "She had a good morning, actually. She ate breakfast without me having to coax her. That's something." "That's a lot," Mike said, and he meant it. Sarah poured 2 cups of coffee without asking if he wanted one. She set his down in front of him and sat across the small table, wrapping both hands around her own mug like she needed something to hold on to. "Mike, can I ask you something?" "Course." "Do you believe me?" Her voice cracked on the last word. "About not knowing?" "Because it feels like everyone in this town has already decided I'm guilty of something, even if they can't say what. And I keep going over it in my head, over and over, trying to figure out what I missed, what I should have seen. Mike didn't answer right away. He let her keep talking, because he could tell she needed to. Derek came to me that first night, Sarah said, her eyes filling up. He was crying, saying we had to find her, saying he had this feeling about places to check. He said his uncle's old warehouse gave him a bad feeling, like something was pulling him there. But he was scared to go alone. He asked me to help him search other spots first. Places closer to the school, the park, the old train tracks by the highway. He said we should save the warehouse for last because it was falling apart and dangerous, and he didn't want me going in there without him. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I believed him. God help me. I believed every word. I thought he loved her. I thought he was scared out of his mind, same as me. I never once thought he was steering us away from where she actually was. Her voice broke completely now. I helped him keep her hidden, Mike. I didn't know it, but I did. Every hour I spent searching the wrong places was an hour she was trapped in that building, alone, scared, drinking rainwater just to survive. That's on me. That's on me forever. Mike reached across the table and put his hand over hers, steady and warm. No, he said. That's on Derek. Only Derek. But I helped him. You helped a man you trusted, a man who was supposed to be Lily's father, because he lied to your face and used your love for her against you. That's not the same as being part of it. That's being a victim of it, same as Lily. Sarah looked up at him, searching his face like she was afraid to hope he meant it. I believe you, Sarah, Mike said, his voice low and certain. Every word. Derek's a liar and a manipulator, and he used you same as he tried to use everybody else in this town. You didn't do anything wrong. You were trying to save your daughter. Tears rolled down her cheeks now, but something in her shoulders eased, like a weight had shifted even if it hadn't lifted all the way. I'm going to help you clear your name, Mike said. Whatever it takes. You and Lily aren't going through this alone anymore. I promise you that. The next morning, the news vans showed up like a swarm of flies on spoiled meat. Mike heard about it before he even got to Sarah's street. Rico called him on the cell phone, clipped to his belt, his voice tight. Mike, you better get over here. Channel 9's got a van parked right in front of her house. Channel 5, too. There's a guy with a camera standing on her lawn. On her lawn? On her lawn. Mike was already pulling on his jacket. I'm calling Preacher and Tiny. Meet me there. By the time Mike rolled up on his motorcycle, the street looked like a circus. 3 news vans lined the curb, their satellite dishes pointed at the sky like something out of a science fiction movie. Reporters in stiff blazers stood on the sidewalk, microphones ready, waiting for Sarah's door to open like vultures waiting for something to die. Mike parked and walked straight toward a young reporter who was crouched by Sarah's front window, trying to peek through the blinds. You need to step back, Mike said. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it that made the reporter straighten up fast. Sir, we're just trying to get a statement. She's not giving statements. Not today, not tomorrow. Step back from the house. The reporter opened his mouth to argue, but that's when Tiny rode up, his motorcycle rumbling like distant thunder, and parked it right at the end of the driveway. Tiny didn't even have to say anything. He just stood there, arms crossed, looking like a mountain that had decided to grow legs. The reporter backed up onto the sidewalk without another word. Preacher and Rico showed up a few minutes later. They didn't yell. They didn't threaten anybody. They just stood, quiet and solid, forming a wall between the reporters and the little blue house with the faded shutters. Inside, Sarah peeked through the curtains, her hand pressed to her chest. Mike, she called through the screen door, I don't know how to thank you. Don't need to thank me, Mike said. Lily got a doctor's appointment today, doesn't she? 2 o'clock. I don't know how we're supposed to get there with all this. She waved a shaky hand toward the vans. We'll get you there, Mike said. "Rico, pull the truck around back. We'll take her out through the alley." It worked like clockwork. Rico brought the truck around, while Preacher and Tiny kept the reporters busy up front, answering nothing, just standing there like statues, until the cameras gave up trying to get a reaction. Sarah slipped out the back door with Lily's hand in hers, and Mike helped them both into the truck, careful and quick. Lily didn't say much during the ride. She sat close to her mom, her small stuffed motorcycle clutched in her lap, the one Mike had given her. She flinched every time they passed a car with a camera mounted on the dashboard, thinking maybe it was another reporter. But she didn't cry. She just held on tighter to the stuffed toy and stared out the window like she was trying to disappear into the glass. The doctor's appointment went fine. "Just a checkup," the doctor said, and Lily was healing up nice on the outside, even if the inside still had a long way to go. Rico waited in the parking lot the whole time, keeping an eye out for anyone with a camera trying to get a shot of Lily walking in or out. By the time they got back to the house, the sun was dipping low, painting the sky in soft orange and pink. The reporters had mostly given up for the day, tired of getting nothing but silence from a bunch of bikers who looked like they'd rather eat gravel than give an interview. Sarah made dinner, something simple, and afterward she sat on the porch swing. Finally still after such a long day. Mike sat on the steps below her, and Preacher and Rico leaned against the porch railing, quiet as the evening settled in around them. That's when Tiny walked up with a book tucked under his big arm. It was one of Lily's favorites, the one about a bear who couldn't find his way home. He lowered himself down onto the porch steps next to Lily, the wood creaking under his weight, and opened the book like it was the most natural thing in the world. Over the next 2 weeks, Mike's motorcycle became a familiar sound on Sarah's street. Every afternoon around 4, the low rumble would roll down the block, and Lily would run to the window to check if it was him. It always was. Preacher started showing up too, his old toolbox rattling in his saddlebag. He'd found Lily's bicycle leaning against the side of the house, its chain rusted and hanging loose like it had given up trying. "This thing's been sitting here a while," Preacher said the first day, crouching down next to it in the driveway. Lily stood a few feet back, watching him with careful eyes. She still did that with new people, kept her distance, waited to see what they'd do before she decided if they were safe. "You want to learn how to fix it?" Preacher asked, not looking up, just working the chain loose with his rough fingers. Lily didn't answer right away. She looked over at Mike, who was sitting on the porch steps, and Mike gave her a small nod, the kind that said, "It's okay. I'm right here." She walked over slow and crouched down next to Preacher. "First thing you gotta do," Preacher said, holding up the greasy chain, "is get all this old gunk off. Chain's not gonna work right if it's clogged up with rust and dirt." He handed her a rag, and she took it careful, like it might bite her. But she wiped down that chain link by link, her small hands turning black with grease, and slowly her shoulders relaxed. By the end of the first day, she was laughing when Preacher pretended the chain grease had jumped onto his nose. Every day after that, it became a routine. Preacher would come, and Lily would meet him in the driveway, and they'd tinker with that bicycle like it was the most important job in the world. Sometimes it was the chain, sometimes it was the brakes, or the seat that had slid too low. Preacher never rushed her. He let her hold the wrench even when she didn't know what to do with it. Let her feel like she was really doing the work instead of just watching. Mike watched all of this from the porch, sitting next to Sarah on the swing that creaked soft and slow with the breeze. At first, they didn't talk much. Just sat there, watching Lily and Preacher, sipping the sweet tea Sarah always seemed to have ready. But slowly, the silence between them turned into conversation. "She hasn't laughed like that in a long time," Sarah said one afternoon, watching her daughter giggle at something Preacher said. "She's a tough kid," Mike said. "Tougher than she knows." Sarah looked over at him. "You really believe that?" "I've seen it," Mike said. "Kids who go through hard things, sometimes they come out stronger on the other side. Takes time, though. Can't rush it." Sarah nodded, and something in her face softened. "You sound like you know that firsthand." Mike didn't say much to that, just looked out at the driveway where Lily was holding up the bicycle chain proudly, showing Preacher she'd gotten all the rust off. But Sarah didn't push. She just let it sit there between them, the quiet understanding that some things didn't need to be explained all the way to be understood. Over those 2 weeks, that porch swing became a place where Sarah and Mike talked about everything and nothing. About Lily's favorite foods, about the weather, about the little things that made up a life trying to get back to normal. Sarah found herself looking forward to that motorcycle sound in the afternoons. Mike found himself doing the same. One evening, with the sky turning that soft gold color it does right before sunset, Lily wiped her greasy hands on her shorts and walked over to the porch steps where Mike was sitting. She stood there a second, twisting her fingers together the way she did when she was working up to something. "Mike," she said quiet. "Yeah, kiddo?" Can I ride on your motorcycle? Just around the block, just once." Mike looked up at her, then over at Sarah, who had gone very still on the swing. "That's up to your mom," Mike said gently. Lily turned to Sarah, her eyes wide and hopeful. "Please, Mommy, just around the block. Mike would keep me safe. I know he would." Sarah looked at her daughter, then at Mike, her hands twisting in her lap. She took a breath. "Just around the block," she said, slow. The next afternoon, Mike showed up right on time, the sound of his motorcycle rolling down the street like it belonged there now. He had something strapped to the back of his seat, small and bright, and when Lily saw it, she came running out the front door before Sarah even had her shoes on. "Is that for me?" Lily asked, pointing at the little helmet. "Got it this morning," Mike said. "Preacher helped me pick the color. Said you'd like the blue one." Lily's eyes went wide. "That's my favorite color." "I know," Mike said, and he almost smiled. "Preacher pays attention." Sarah came down the porch steps, slow, her arms crossed tight over her chest, the same way she held herself during hard conversations. She watched Mike kneel down in the driveway to Lily's height, the helmet in his big hands. "All right," Mike said. "First thing about riding is safety comes before fun. That's the rule. Every time." Lily nodded serious, like she was being told something important, which she was. Mike slipped the helmet over her head, careful with her hair, and buckled the strap under her chin. He tugged it gentle to make sure it was snug. "Too tight?" he asked. Lily shook her head. "Can you breathe okay?" She giggled. "Yes, Mike." Sarah stepped closer, crouching down in front of her daughter. She adjusted the helmet just slightly, more for herself than for Lily, her fingers lingering on the strap. "You listen to Mike," Sarah said, her voice tight. "You hold on tight to him the whole time. You understand?" "I will, Mommy. And if you want to stop, you just say so. Any time. Okay?" "Okay," Lily said, but she was already looking past her mother at the motorcycle, at the black leather seat gleaming in the afternoon sun. Mike stood up and swung his leg over the bike, settling into the seat with the ease of a man who'd been riding since before Lily was born. He reached down and lifted her up careful, sitting her right behind him on the small seat Rico had rigged up special, with a strap that went around her waist and connected to Mike's belt so she couldn't slide off even if she tried. Hands on my vest, Mike said. Hold tight. Lily grabbed 2 fistfuls of leather, her small fingers curling into the worn material. Ready? Mike asked. Ready, Lily said, and there was no shake in her voice at all. Sarah stood in the driveway, her hand pressed flat against her chest like she was trying to hold her heart in place. She watched Mike ease the motorcycle out onto the street. Slow, careful, the engine humming low instead of roaring the way it usually did. They went around the block just like they said. Mike kept it slow the whole way, taking the turns wide and gentle, glancing back every few seconds to check on the small hands gripping his vest. Lily's laughter carried on the wind, high and bright, the kind of sound that made the neighbors look up from their yards and smile without knowing why. Sarah stood in the driveway the whole time, counting the seconds, her foot tapping against the pavement. When she finally heard the engine coming back around the corner, she let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. The motorcycle rolled to a stop in the driveway, and before Mike had even cut the engine, Lily was already talking, the words tumbling out fast and excited. Mommy, did you see? We went so fast. Well, not that fast, but it felt fast. And the wind was blowing and I could see everything, the whole street. And Mr. Patterson was watering his flowers and he waved at us. Mike helped her down off the bike, unbuckling the strap and lifting the helmet carefully off her head. Her hair was messy underneath, sticking up in every direction, and her cheeks were flushed pink from the wind. That, Lily announced, throwing her arms up in the air, was the coolest thing ever. Sarah laughed, a real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere deep and had been buried for weeks. She scooped Lily up into a hug, helmet and all, and looked over her daughter's shoulder at Mike, who was standing there with the kind of smile that didn't come easy to a face like his. Thank you, Sarah mouthed, and Mike just nodded, because some things didn't need more words than that. The warehouse looked different in daylight. Smaller, somehow, than it had felt that night when Mike kicked the door in and heard Lily crying behind the wall. Now the sun came through the broken windows in long yellow strips, showing off all the dust floating in the air, and the whole place smelled like old wood and rust. Mike stood at the entrance with 2 detectives, a man named Detective Reyes and a younger woman named Detective Park. They both wore gloves and carried evidence bags, the kind that zipped shut with a little plastic strip. Mike had asked to come along, and after some back and forth with the department, they'd agreed. He knew this building better than anybody now. He'd walked every inch of it looking for Lily. We appreciate you being here, Detective Park said, snapping on her gloves. Sometimes a fresh set of eyes catches what we miss. Wasn't fresh eyes that found her, Reyes muttered, but there wasn't any bite in it, just tired respect. They moved through the warehouse slow, checking corners, checking the old crates stacked against the far wall, checking the floor for anything that might have been dropped. Mike walked toward the back, toward the false wall he'd torn open with his bare hands. Someone had patched part of it since then, boarded it up loose so nobody would fall through, but the hole was still there, dark and small, exactly the size a little girl could fit through and nothing bigger. He crouched down in front of it. His knees popped, and he ignored the sound, the same way he ignored most things his body told him these days. This is where you found her? Park asked, kneeling beside him. Right here, Mike said. She was curled up against that pipe. He pointed to a rusted piece of metal running along the base of the wall, a thin trickle of water still dripping from a crack in it, slow and steady like a clock ticking. That's what kept her alive. Rainwater. Park wrote something down. Reyes shone a flashlight into the gap, moving it along the walls, the floor, looking for anything the first search might have missed. Fingerprints, fibers, anything that could tie Derek to the scene beyond a doubt. The lawyer was already building his defense, and Mike knew, the way he knew things in his gut, that this case needed more than feelings and instinct. It needed proof. "Careful in there," Mike said. "There's nails sticking out near the bottom." Reyes nodded and kept working, methodical, patient. Mike watched him for a while, then turned his attention to the space Lily had been trapped in, the tight little pocket behind the false wall. He remembered how small she'd looked in there, how her arms had felt like nothing when he lifted her out, like she weighed less than his old leather jacket. He reached his hand into the gap, feeling along the wall where the boards met, where the wood had rotted and pulled apart just enough to leave cracks. His fingers brushed against something that wasn't wood, something softer. Paper. "Hold on," Mike said. Both detectives looked over. Mike reached in further, careful, his big fingers working slow so he wouldn't tear whatever it was. He pulled out a small piece of paper, crumpled and stained with water, the edges torn like it had been ripped from something bigger. A notebook page, maybe, or the back of a coloring book. He unfolded it slow, his hands not quite steady. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, the letters big and crooked the way a 6-year-old writes when she's trying her hardest to make the words come out right. "Please help me, I'm scared it's dark. I want my mommy." Mike stared at it for a long moment. The warehouse went quiet around him, the dripping pipe the only sound, drip, 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 the same rhythm that had kept Lily alive for 2 days. "Torres," Reyes said quietly. "What is that?" Mike didn't answer right away. His throat felt tight, and he had to clear it before any words would come. "She wrote a note," he said finally. "She tried to call for help. The whole time she was in there, she tried." Park came over and looked at the paper in his hands, her face going pale. She pulled out an evidence bag, and Mike held the note out to her, though it took everything in him to let go of it. "This needs to go straight to the DA," Reyes said. "This is going to matter. This is going to matter a lot." Mike nodded, but his mind was already somewhere else. It was on Sarah, and what her face was going to look like when she found out her daughter had written those words and never gotten the chance to send them. Mike parked his motorcycle at the curb outside Sarah's small house just as the sun was going down. The porch light was already on, casting a soft yellow glow over the steps. He sat there for a minute, engine ticking as it cooled, the folded photocopy of the note tucked inside his jacket pocket. The detectives had kept the original for evidence, but they'd let him take a copy, understanding somehow that this wasn't just police business. This was a mother's business. He climbed off the bike, slow, his knees aching the way they always did these days, and walked up to the door. Before he could knock, it opened. Sarah stood there in a faded gray sweater, her hair pulled back, messy, dark circles under her eyes that hadn't gone away in weeks. "Mike," she said, surprised. "Is everything okay? Is Lily?" "Lily's fine," Mike said quick, before her mind could run somewhere scary. "She's with Tiny and Rico watching cartoons. I asked them to bring her by so I could talk to you first." Sarah's shoulders relaxed a little, but her eyes stayed wary. She'd learned to be wary of news these past weeks. Every time someone showed up at her door, it seemed to mean something bad. "Can I come in?" Mike asked. She stepped aside and let him through. The house was quiet, tidy in that careful way people keep things when they're trying to hold their life together with both hands. Mike sat down on the edge of the couch, and Sarah sat across from him in the armchair, her hands twisting together in her lap. "We went back to the warehouse today," Mike said. "Me and 2 detectives, going over everything again, making sure nothing got missed." Sarah nodded, waiting, her face already tightening like she was bracing for something. "We found something," Mike said, Behind the wall, where I found her." He reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded paper, smoothing it flat on his knee before he held it out to her. Sarah took it slow, like it might burn her fingers. She unfolded it, and Mike watched her eyes move across the crumpled page, across the shaky, crooked letters. "Please help me, I'm scared it's dark. I want my mommy." For a moment, Sarah didn't move at all. She just stared at the paper like she couldn't understand what she was looking at, like her mind refused to let the words be real. "She wrote this," Sarah whispered. "She was in there, and she wrote this." "She tried to get help," Mike said, his voice low and careful. "The whole time, she never stopped trying." Sarah's hand started to shake. The paper trembled between her fingers, and her breath came out in a short, broken gasp. "I was helping him search," she said. "I was walking through parking lots and calling shelters while my little girl was locked in a wall, begging for me." "Sarah, you didn't know." "I should have known." The words tore out of her, sharp and raw. "I'm her mother. I should have known where she was. I should have felt it." The dam broke then. Sarah folded forward, the paper still clutched in her hand, and she began to sob, deep and shaking sobs that seemed to come from somewhere far below her ribs. Mike moved to the couch's edge, close enough to reach her but not touching. Just steady, just present, the way he'd learned to be with frightened things. "She was so scared," Sarah cried. "She was all alone and she was scared and I didn't come. I didn't come for 2 whole days." "You're here now," Mike said quietly. "You're here now, and she knows it." Sarah cried for a long time, her whole body shaking with the weight of it, the guilt and grief pouring out of her like something that had been locked up too long behind her own kind of wall. Mike stayed close, saying nothing more, just letting her feel it, all of it, because some things couldn't be fixed with words. They just had to be survived. By the next morning, the story was on every local news channel. Missing girl's handwritten plea found at kidnapping scene. Within hours, donations began pouring in from strangers all over town. Money for therapy, money for legal costs, cards and flowers left on Sarah's porch by people she'd never met. The whole community, it seemed, had decided to stand behind the little girl who never stopped trying to be found. 3 weeks later, Mike sat in a small office downtown, the kind with too many file cabinets and not enough windows. Sarah sat next to him, her hands folded tight in her lap. Across the desk sat the prosecuting attorney, a woman named Ms. Reyes, with sharp eyes and a stack of papers in front of her. Ms. Reyes had a way of getting straight to the point. She didn't waste time with small talk. "I wanted to bring you both in today," she said, "because I think you should hear this from me, not from a headline." Sarah's fingers tightened around each other. Mike could see the fear creeping back into her face, the same fear that had lived there for weeks now. "Derek's lawyers filed their defense strategy yesterday," Ms. Reyes went on. "They're going to argue temporary insanity. They're claiming his desperation to save his marriage clouded his judgment so badly that he wasn't in his right mind when he planned this." The room went quiet. Mike felt his jaw tighten. "That's not insanity," Mike said, his voice low and hard. "That's a man who planned everything down to the last detail. He picked the building, he picked the day, he lied to the cops on camera. That takes a clear head, not a broken one." "I agree with you," Ms. Reyes said. "But juries can be unpredictable. If his lawyers manage to convince even a few jurors that he wasn't thinking straight, wasn't in control of his actions, it could mean a lighter sentence, maybe a few years instead of what he deserves." Sarah's face had gone pale. "A few years," she repeated, like the words tasted bad in her mouth. He locked her in a wall for 2 days. She almost died in there. And he might only get a few years? I'm going to fight this as hard as I can, Ms. Reyes said. The note Lily wrote, that's powerful evidence. It shows premeditation. It shows the real danger she was in. But I have to be honest with you both. Trials don't always go the way we hope. Mike reached over and put a hand on Sarah's arm, but she didn't seem to feel it. Her eyes had gone somewhere far away, somewhere dark. They talked a little longer, Ms. Reyes going over dates and procedures, explaining what would happen in the coming weeks. But Sarah barely spoke. She just nodded when it seemed like she was supposed to, her eyes fixed on some spot on the floor. When the meeting ended, Mike walked Sarah out to the parking lot. The afternoon sun was bright and warm, but Sarah looked like she was standing in the middle of a storm. "Sarah," Mike said gently, "look at me." She turned, and he saw it then, the guilt rising up in her again, thick and heavy, the same guilt that had nearly swallowed her whole 3 weeks ago. "He might walk away with almost nothing," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "After what he did to her. After what I let him do." "You didn't let him do anything," Mike said. "He tricked you. He tricked everybody." "But it doesn't matter, does it?" Sarah said, her voice rising now, cracking at the edges. "It doesn't matter whose fault it was. My daughter almost died in that wall, and the man who put her there might get to walk out of a courtroom in a few years like none of it happened." "Sarah, I need to go," she said suddenly, stepping back from him. "I need to pick up Lily." "I can drive you," Mike offered. "No," she said, too fast, too sharp. "I've got my car. I'll be fine." She turned and walked away before Mike could say anything else, her arms wrapped tight around herself like she was trying to hold her own pieces together. Mike stood there in the parking lot, watching her go, feeling something cold settle in his chest. Over the next few days, Sarah stopped answering his calls the way she used to. She sent short texts instead of long conversations. She skipped the community dinner that Preacher and Tiny had planned, saying she wasn't feeling well. She kept Lily close to home, away from the rides around the block, away from the bedtime stories in Tiny's booming voice. Mike watched it happen from a distance, the same way you watch storm clouds roll in before you can do anything to stop the rain. Sarah was pulling away, disappearing behind a wall of her own, and Mike didn't know yet how to reach her. The little house on Maple Street used to have its curtains open. Sarah liked the morning light, she always said, liked how it made the kitchen feel warm, even in winter. But by the middle of that week, the curtains stayed shut, and the house sat quiet like it was holding its breath. Mrs. Petrov from next door tried knocking on Tuesday. She had a plate of cookies in her hands, still warm, wrapped in foil. She knocked 3 times, waited, knocked again. Nobody came. She left the plate on the porch step with a little note, and by evening the cookies were still sitting there, untouched, growing cold in the night air. Preacher called Sarah's phone on Wednesday to see if Lily wanted him to bring over her bicycle. The chain had been fixed for days now, good as new, and he'd been looking forward to seeing her face when she saw it working right again. The phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail. He tried again an hour later. Same thing. "She's not picking up for anybody," Preacher told Mike that night, standing in the clubhouse garage with grease still on his hands. "Not me, not Tiny, not the ladies from church who keep calling to check in. Ryko said he saw her at the grocery store yesterday, and she practically ran the other way when she saw him." Mike didn't say anything for a long moment. He just stood there, staring at a spot on the concrete floor like it might have answers written on it somewhere. "She's scared," he finally said. "Scared of what people think. Scared of what's coming in that courtroom." "Scared of us?" Preacher asked, and there was something hurt in his voice, something none of them were used to hearing from him. "Not of us," Mike said. Of everything. She's drowning, Preacher, and she thinks the only way to keep from pulling anybody down with her is to push us all away. Mike decided to go see her himself that Thursday. He didn't call ahead. He knew if he did, she'd find some reason not to answer the door. The house looked smaller somehow when he pulled up, like it had folded in on itself. The little garden Sarah used to keep looked ragged, weeds creeping up through the flower beds. He knocked, and it took a long time before he heard footsteps. Sarah opened the door only part way, just enough to see out. Her hair was pulled back messy, and there were dark circles under her eyes that hadn't been there a week ago. "Mike," she said, and her voice was flat, tired. "This isn't a good time." "I just wanted to check on you both," Mike said. "That's all. I brought Lily something." He held up a small, stuffed motorcycle, the same kind he'd given her before, soft and worn at the edges from being loved on already. Sarah looked at it, then looked away. "She's not really talking much these days," Sarah said quietly. "To anybody. Can I see her? Just for a minute?" Sarah hesitated, her hand still gripping the edge of the door. Then, like she didn't have the strength left to say no, she stepped back and let him in. Lily was sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by crayons that weren't being used. The television was off. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses on your ears. "Hey, kiddo," Mike said softly, kneeling down beside her. "I brought you something." He held out the little stuffed motorcycle. Lily looked at it. Her eyes flicked up to his face for just a second, and Mike saw something there, something scared and small, before she looked back down at the crayons. She didn't reach for it. She didn't say a word. "Lily." Mike tried again, gentler this time. "It's me. It's Mike." Nothing. Not a sound, not a smile, not even the small nod she used to give him when words felt too hard. She just sat there, staring at the crayons, her small shoulders curled inward like she was trying to disappear. Mike glanced up at Sarah, standing in the doorway with her arms wrapped around herself. Her eyes were wet, and she looked away quickly, like she couldn't bear to watch. He set the stuffed motorcycle down gently on the floor next to Lily, close enough for her to reach if she wanted. She didn't move toward it. Mike sat there a while longer, saying quiet things, easy things, the kind of things that used to make her giggle. But the room stayed silent, and Lily stayed folded into herself, and something in Mike's chest ached with a fear he didn't know how to fix. Mike sat in his garage for a long time that night, turning a wrench over in his hands without actually fixing anything. Preacher had gone home. Tiny had gone home. The clubhouse was quiet, except for the buzz of the overhead light, and Mike just sat there thinking about Lily's face, about how empty it had looked, like somebody had reached inside her and turned off a switch. He thought about walking away. Maybe Sarah needed space. Maybe he was pushing too hard, showing up like some kind of guardian angel who thought he could fix everything with a stuffed animal and a soft voice. But then he thought about the little girl curled up in that warehouse, about the note Sarah had found crumpled in the wall, and he knew he couldn't just leave them alone in the dark. Not now. Not after everything. So the next evening, he drove back to Maple Street. The porch light was off when he pulled up. He could see the flicker of a television through a gap in the curtains, blue light dancing on the ceiling. He climbed the steps and knocked, not loud, just steady. It took a while. When the door finally opened, Sarah looked even more worn down than before. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying, or trying not to. "Mike, please," she said before he could even speak. "I can't do this tonight." "I'm not here to fix anything," Mike said quietly. "I'm not here as some hero riding in. I just want to sit with you a minute, that's all, as a friend." Sarah's grip on the door tightened. "Everyone keeps saying that. Friend? Like that word means something different now that my whole life is on the news. It does mean something, Mike said. It means I'm not going anywhere, no matter how many times you tell me to. She stood there, torn, her body still blocking the doorway like a wall she'd built out of pure exhaustion. But something in Mike's steady gaze must have cracked through, because she stepped back and let him in without another word. They sat in the living room. Lily was already asleep upstairs, the house dim and hushed around them. Sarah sank onto the couch like her legs had given out, and Mike lowered himself into the chair across from her, elbows on his knees. I keep thinking, Sarah said, staring at nothing, that if I'd just paid more attention, if I'd just seen through him sooner, none of this would have happened. She wouldn't be sitting up there right now, scared to even look at her own crayons. You didn't do this, Mike said. Derek did this. But I helped him, Sarah whispered. I walked right past that warehouse. I told the police it gave me a bad feeling, and then I believed him when he said it wasn't worth checking. I helped him hide my own daughter. You were lied to, Mike said, his voice low and steady. That's different than lying yourself. Sarah shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks, but she didn't answer. Mike leaned back, quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. When I was a kid, he said finally, I used to wait by the window every night for my old man to come home. Didn't matter how late. Didn't matter that he showed up smelling like a bar most nights. I just wanted somebody to notice I was there. Sarah looked up at him, surprised like she hadn't expected this. Nobody ever fought for me, Mike went on. Not my dad, not the foster families after him. I learned real young that when things get hard, people leave. That's just how it works, I thought. He paused. But I'm not leaving. Not this time. I'm fighting for Lily. I'm fighting for you. Or because somebody should have fought for me, and nobody did, and I'm not going to let that happen to that little girl upstairs. Sarah's hands were shaking. She wiped at her face, and for the first time in days, her shoulders loosened, just slightly, like a weight had shifted. I don't know how to keep going, she whispered. I don't know how to fix this. You don't have to do it alone, Mike said. Let us walk with you. Just take the next step. That's all you have to do. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Then, slowly, she nodded. The next few days moved fast, but Sarah didn't face them alone. Every morning, Mike showed up at her door with 2 cups of coffee, one black, one with too much sugar the way Sarah liked it. They would sit at her kitchen table and go over the list the prosecutor had given them. Dates, times, small details that mattered more than anyone would think. Sarah wrote everything down in a notebook, her handwriting getting steadier each day. You're doing great, Mike told her, watching her cross out a line and rewrite it neater. This is going to help Lily. You know that, right? Sarah nodded, though her hands still trembled sometimes when she picked up her pen. On Tuesday, they drove downtown to meet with the prosecutor, a sharp woman named Ms. Alvarez, who wore reading glasses pushed up on her head and spoke in quick, clear sentences. She walked them through what the trial would look like. She explained how Sarah would need to describe the days leading up to Lily's disappearance, how Derek had convinced her to search certain places, how his lies had been so smooth she never once doubted them. You're not on trial here, Ms. Alvarez said, looking Sarah straight in the eye. Don't let anyone in that courtroom make you feel like you are. Sarah swallowed hard and nodded. Mike sat beside her the whole time, arms crossed, saying nothing, but his presence alone seemed to steady her, like a big oak tree she could lean against when the wind got too strong. Back at the clubhouse, Preacher and Tiny were doing their part too, even if it didn't look like much from the outside. Preacher spent an afternoon fixing the chain on Lily's bicycle again, even though it wasn't broken, just so she'd have something normal to do with her hands. Lily sat cross-legged on the garage floor, handing him tools when he asked, her face serious with concentration. "You're getting good at this," Preacher told her, tightening a bolt. "Might make a mechanic out of you yet." Lily almost smiled. Almost. Tiny showed up most nights with a new book tucked under his big arm, plopping himself down on the edge of Lily's bed, like a mountain settling into place. His voice, usually loud enough to rattle windows, dropped low and soft when he read to her, doing silly voices for every character until she giggled despite herself. It wasn't much, but it was something. And something mattered a whole lot these days. Rico worked behind the scenes, making calls, keeping track of paperwork, making sure Sarah didn't have to worry about things like parking passes or where to be and when. He didn't say much, but he showed up every time, steady as a clock. By Thursday night, the night before the trial was set to begin, the house on Maple Street felt different. Not happy, not yet, but not as heavy either. Like everyone inside had been holding their breath for weeks and were finally, carefully, letting a little bit of it out. Mike came by after dinner, a small paper bag in his hand. Lily was sitting on the living room floor in her pajamas, her hair still damp from her bath, when he crouched down beside her. "Got something for you," he said, holding out the bag. Lily opened it slowly, careful like she always was with new things now. Inside was a small, stuffed motorcycle, black and silver, with tiny wheels that actually spun and a soft leather seat stitched just right. "It's like yours," she whispered, looking up at him. "That's right," Mike said. "I want you to hold on to this tomorrow. When you go in that room and you gotta talk to the judge and you feel scared, you just hold on tight to this little guy right here." Lily hugged the toy motorcycle against her chest, her small fingers wrapping around it like it was the most precious thing in the world. "Are you scared?" she asked quietly. Mike thought about lying, then decided against it. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But you know what I learned? Being scared doesn't mean you're not brave. Being brave means doing the hard thing even when you're scared. And you, kiddo, you are one of the bravest people I know." Lily looked down at the toy in her hands, then back up at Mike, her eyes shining in the lamplight. "I'll hold on tight," she said. "That's my girl," Mike said. And for the first time in a long time, Lily's smile reached all the way to her eyes. The Millbrook Falls Courthouse was not a big building. It had 4 white columns out front and old wooden doors that stuck a little when you pushed them open. But on Friday morning, it felt like the whole town had shown up to fit inside. Mike stood on the steps in his best clothes, which still meant his leather vest, freshly cleaned, over a button-down shirt. Preacher, Tiny, and Rico stood beside him, all 4 of them looking like a wall nobody could get past. Reporters had gathered across the street, held back by a line of yellow tape and Officer Daniels, who nodded at Mike as he walked by. Inside, the courtroom smelled like old wood and floor polish. Sarah sat at the front, her hands folded tight in her lap, wearing a plain blue dress. Ms. Alvarez sat beside her, calm and steady, flipping through a folder of papers. Derek sat across the room in a gray suit that looked too new, too clean. His lawyer whispered in his ear. Derek's face was arranged into something sad and sorry, but Mike had seen that face before, on the news, crying tears that came too fast. The judge, a tired-looking man with kind eyes named Judge Whitfield, called the room to order. Mike was the first to take the stand. He told them about the night he heard the cry from the warehouse, about kicking down the boarded door, about finding Lily curled up small and scared behind a false wall. His voice stayed steady until he got to the part about the note. "We found it stuffed in a crack in the wall," Mike said. "Little girl's handwriting. She wrote, 'Help me,' over and over. She tried to get out on her own." A few people in the gallery gasped. Sarah pressed a hand over her mouth. Ms. Alvarez held up the actual note, sealed in plastic, and passed it to the judge. The room went quiet as he read it, his jaw tightening. Preacher took the stand next, describing how he'd fixed Lily's bike chain even when it wasn't broken, just to give her something to hold on to. Tiny talked about reading her bedtime stories, how she used to flinch at loud noises but slowly stopped. Rico explained all the quiet work he'd done, the calls, the schedules, the small things that added up to something big. Then it was Sarah's turn. She walked to the stand with her chin up, though her hands shook at her sides. Ms. Alvarez asked her gentle questions first, easing her into it. Then came the harder ones. What did Derek tell her? Why did she believe him? Why did she search the places he pointed her toward? He said his uncle's warehouse gave him a bad feeling, Sarah said, her voice cracking. He told me not to waste time there. I believed him. I believed every word. She looked toward the gallery, found Mike's eyes, and steadied herself. I would never have hurt my daughter. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Derek's lawyer tried to twist her words, suggesting she should have known, should have seen the signs. But Ms. Alvarez stood firm, reminding the courtroom again and again that Sarah was not the one on trial. By the time the morning testimonies ended, the courtroom felt heavy with the truth of it all, thick as summer air before a storm. During the break, Judge Whitfield called for a private session in his chambers. He wanted to hear from Lily herself, but not in the courtroom, not in front of Derek, not in front of all those eyes. The chamber was smaller than the courtroom, warmer somehow, with a big wooden desk and the shelves of law books lining the walls. Lily walked in holding Sarah's hand on one side and clutching her stuffed motorcycle to her chest with the other arm. Judge Whitfield knelt down so he was eye level with her, his voice soft. Hi there, Lily. My name is Judge Whitfield. Can you tell me something important? Something you want me to know? Lily looked down at her stuffed motorcycle, then up at Sarah, then back at the judge. Her grip on the toy tightened. I want my mommy to know, she said, her small voice trembling but clear. That I'm not mad at her. She didn't know. She would never let anything bad happen to me. The room went still. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, her hand pressed to her chest. She's my mommy, Lily added, hugging the motorcycle tighter. And I love her. The next morning, the courtroom filled up fast. By 9 o'clock, every seat in the gallery was taken. People stood along the back wall. Even some folks who had nothing to do with the case had come, just to see how it would end. Mike sat in the second row, squeezed between Preacher and Tiny, with Rico on the end. His hands rested on his knees, but his fingers kept curling into fists, and then relaxing again, over and over. He couldn't help it. His whole body felt tight, like a spring wound too far. Sarah sat up front with Ms. Alvarez. She wore the same blue dress from the day before. Lily was not there. Sarah had decided, with Ms. Alvarez's gentle advice, that it was better for her to stay home with Mrs. Delgado from next door, away from cameras and whispers, and whatever the day might bring. Derek sat across the room again, still in his gray suit. But he looked smaller today. His lawyer no longer whispered in his ear. He just stared straight ahead at the empty judge's bench, like a man waiting for a train he already knew was going to hit him. The bailiff called the room to order. All rise for the Honorable Judge Whitfield. Everyone stood. Mike felt Preacher's shoulder brush his own, steady and solid. Tiny let out a breath beside him. Nobody spoke. Judge Whitfield walked in, his black robe swishing softly around his ankles. He sat down, folded his hands on his desk, and looked out over the courtroom for a long moment before he spoke. I have spent the last day thinking about this case, he began. Thinking about a 6-year-old girl who spent 2 days trapped in a warehouse, drinking rainwater from a broken pipe, writing "help me" on a scrap of paper because no one had come for her. The room was so quiet, Mike could hear the ceiling fan turning overhead. I have thought about a mother who was manipulated and used, who searched tirelessly for her daughter without knowing the truth, and who has shown more courage in this courtroom than most people show in a lifetime. Sarah's shoulders shook. Miss Alvarez placed a hand on her arm. And I have thought, the judge continued, about the community that stepped in when the systems in place failed to act quickly enough. An unconventional village, some might say. Men who look rough around the edges but who gave a frightened child bicycle rides, bedtime stories, and a reason to feel safe again. Mike felt his throat tighten. Beside him, Tiny sniffed loudly and wiped at his eyes with the back of his big hand. The judge turned his gaze to Derek. Mr. Anderson, you stood in front of cameras and cried for a daughter you claimed to love, while knowing the entire time exactly where she was and what condition she was in. You gambled with a child's life to save your own image. That is not desperation. That is cruelty dressed up as love. Derek's lawyer started to rise, but the judge held up a hand, and he sat back down. I am sentencing you to 22 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole only after serving a minimum of 18. This court hopes that gives you time to understand the true weight of what you have done. A sound rippled through the courtroom. Not quite a cheer, but something close to it. A collective exhale. Somewhere behind Mike, a woman began to cry softly. Derek's face went pale. He didn't move as the bailiff stepped forward to lead him away, his gray suit suddenly looking too big for him, like it belonged to someone else now. Judge Whitfield banged his gavel once. Court is adjourned. The room broke into motion. People stood, hugged each other, wiped their eyes. Sarah turned first to Ms. Alvarez, gripping her hands, saying thank you over and over. Then she turned around, searching the crowd, and found Mike already standing, already moving toward her. She crossed the space between them without saying a word and wrapped her arms around him. Mike, who had spent 45 years learning not to need anyone, stood there for a moment, stiff with surprise, before his arms came up around her shoulders. It's over, Sarah whispered into his vest, her voice breaking. It's really over. Mike held her while she cried, feeling months of fear finally start to loosen its grip, right there in the middle of the crowded, noisy, weeping courtroom. 3 weeks after the trial, Millbrook Falls had started to feel like itself again. The morning sun came up soft and gold over Maple Street, and Mike Torres sat on his motorcycle outside the Anderson house, waiting the way he did every school day now. His engine idled low, a steady rumble that didn't scare birds off the telephone wires anymore. They'd gotten used to it, same as everybody else in town. The front door banged open, and Lily came bursting out, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, her bicycle helmet already strapped on crooked. You're gonna be late for your own funeral, kid, Mike called out, but he was smiling when he said it. I'm not late, you're early, Lily shot back, wheeling her bike down the driveway. It was a purple bike with white streamers on the handlebars, a birthday gift from Preacher and Tiny that had taken up half the garage in wrapping paper. She swung her leg over the seat like she'd done it 1,000 times, because by now she had. Sarah stood in the doorway in her robe, coffee mug in hand, watching them with the kind of smile that still surprised her sometimes, like she wasn't quite used to feeling that light. Straight to school, both of you, she called. No detours for ice cream this time, Mike. One time, Mike said, holding up a finger. That was one time. It's becoming a pattern. Lily giggled and pushed off, pedaling down the sidewalk. Mike eased his bike alongside her, slow, careful, matching her pace exactly the way he had every morning since Sarah first agreed to let him do this. He never went faster than she could keep up with. He never let more than a few feet grow between them. It was a promise he'd made to himself the first day, and he'd kept it every single time since. They rode like that down Maple Street, past the gas station where her missing poster used to hang, past the church, past the old warehouse that the town had finally voted to tear down. Lily didn't look at it anymore. She used to. Now her eyes stayed on the road ahead, on her handlebars, on the wind in her face. At the school gate, she hopped off her bike and waved. "Bye, Mike. Bye, kid. Learned something today." "I always do." He watched her run inside before he turned his bike around and headed back down Maple Street, feeling something warm settle in his chest, same as it did every single morning. That evening, Mike came back to the house, this time in his truck, with a box of ribs from Rosie's Diner riding shotgun. Preacher and Tiny pulled up right behind him on their bikes, and Rico came a few minutes later carrying 2 bags of corn and a watermelon under one arm, like it weighed nothing at all. Sarah met them at the door, and something in her face was different tonight. Lighter, maybe, or fuller. "I have news," she said, before anybody even got their shoes off. "Good news, I hope," Tiny said, setting a grocery bag on the counter. "Miss Alvarez helped me get connected with a group," Sarah said. "It's called Bright Path. They work with families of missing kids, help them navigate everything, the police, the courts, the media. I met with them yesterday." She paused, twisting her hands together the way she still did when she was nervous. "I told them I wanted to volunteer. Tell our story, if it helps somebody else." Mike looked up from unpacking the ribs. "You serious?" "Dead serious." Sarah's eyes were bright. "And they said your crew's already been in touch with them. Something about donating time for search coordination?" Rico grinned. "Figured somebody had to teach these charity folks how to actually find people." "We already sent Rico's number over," Preacher added. "Man's got a filing system in his head better than most computers." Sarah laughed, a real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere deep and hadn't been let out in a long time. "So I guess that makes us co-workers now." "Guess it does," Mike said. They set the table together, mismatched chairs pulled in from every corner of the house, Lily's booster seat squeezed between Mike and Tiny. Sarah brought out plates, and Rico cut the watermelon, and Preacher told a story about a raccoon that once got into his saddlebags that had Lily laughing so hard she nearly fell out of her chair. Steam rose off the ribs. Corn passed hand to hand around the table. Outside, the evening light turned gold over Maple Street, and inside, 5 people who never should have belonged together sat elbow to elbow, passing food and laughter back and forth, like they'd been doing it their whole lives. Summer had settled over Millbrook Falls like a warm blanket, and the town square was bursting with color. Streamers hung between the old oak trees. Folding tables sagged under the weight of potato salad and lemon cakes, and pitchers of sweet tea sweating in the heat. Kids ran wild between the legs of grown-ups, chasing each other with squirt guns, and the smell of grilled corn and barbecue smoke drifted over everything. Mike rode into the square with Preacher, Tiny, and Rico beside him, their bikes rumbling low and easy, no longer the sound that made mothers pull their children close. Now, heads turned and hands waved. Mr. Dobbins from the hardware store gave a thumbs up. The Hendersons twins ran alongside the bikes for half a block, laughing, until their mother called them back for lunch. "Would you look at that?" Preacher said, cutting his engine near the picnic tables. "Feels like we own the place." "Feels like we belong here," Tiny corrected, swinging his big frame off his bike. Different thing. Mike didn't say anything. He just smiled, the kind of smile that came easy these days, the kind that used to feel foreign on his scarred face, but now fit like an old glove. Mike! Mike, look! He turned just in time to catch Lily barreling toward him, her sneakers kicking up dust, her braids bouncing with every step. Pinned to the front of her shirt, right over her heart, was a piece of construction paper folded and creased from being handled too many times. Glitter glue spelled out the words in crooked, careful letters. World's Best Honorary Grandpa. "You're still wearing that?" Mike said, crouching down to catch her as she crashed into him. "That was weeks ago." "I wear it every time I see you," Lily said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Mommy said I could pin it on today's special, since everybody's here." Behind her, Sarah walked up with a paper plate in each hand, her hair pulled back loose, sunlight catching the easy piece on her face. She handed one plate to Mike. "She wouldn't let me leave the house without it. Told me it was part of the outfit." "Well." Mike stood, tucking the plate under his arm, and looked down at Lily with something thick rising in his throat. "Guess I better wear the title proud then." "You have to," Lily said seriously. "It's official. I made it at my party." "Then it's official," Mike agreed. The afternoon rolled on slow and sweet. Rico got roped into a game of horseshoes with the mayor and somehow still won. Preacher sat under the oak tree, fixing a training wheel that had come loose on some kid's bike. 3 more children lined up behind waiting their turn, like he was running some kind of shop. Tiny had a crowd of kids around him near the dessert table, his booming voice rising and falling as he spun some outrageous tale about a bear he definitely never really wrestled, and Sarah stood nearby, laughing so hard she had to wipe her eyes. Mike found a spot on a bench near the edge of the square, plate balanced on his knee, and watched it all unfold. The town he used to circle on his bike, the one that used to lock its doors a little tighter when he rode past. Now it was spread out in front of him, warm and loud and alive, and somehow, impossibly, he was part of it. Lily's bike leaned against the tree where she'd left it, streamers fluttering in the breeze. She grabbed it now, calling to a cluster of kids near the fountain, and took off pedaling across the grass, her laughter carrying high over the noise of the crowd. She wove between the other bicycles, matching pace with kids her own age, no one slowing down for her, no one needing to. She didn't need anybody riding beside her now. She could keep up all on her own. Mike watched her go, watched her hair fly loose from its braid, watched the gap in her smile catch the sunlight, same as it had on that missing poster all those months ago. Except now there was nothing missing about her at all. He thought about blood, and how little of it actually mattered. Thought about the family a person got handed at birth, and the family a person built instead, board by board, choice by choice, the ones who showed up and stayed even when it would have been easier to walk away. Lily circled back around, waving at him from her bike, and Mike raised his hand and waved back, feeling something in his chest settle deep and warm and permanent, like it had finally found its home. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.